Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Heavy Repping. My name is John Tron Davidson, and this is another episode of Pick ASMR. I'm continuing to work my way through this enormous mound of plectrums, and there's some tremendous things I want to share with you. So without further ado, let's begin. So as you can see from all of the pieces that I've got on the table here, there's an awful lot of shapes. A lot of unusual pieces as well. So I thought what I'd do today is go through some of the more unusual pieces that I have in my collection, or at least the ones that are present here, as this isn't everything. The table is simply not large enough to hold everything. But I thought we would start today with these. And there is a third one that I saw in here. Just very satisfying doing it. I do love the sound of picks being spread across the table. Now these three here are picks from Mako. Mako is a pick maker in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and these are called the Jumbos for obvious reasons. Now the three of these measure between 6 and 10 millimeters respectively. And it's not often that we get into the double figures aspect here, simply because there are less pick makers making to that size, though I do have plenty of examples. You will have to forgive my light, as it's decided that it doesn't want any part of this, and I'm trying to work through that. So I received these relatively recently, and one of the things that I particularly like about them is that although they seem incredibly intimidating at first glance, they're actually very, very comfortable. They're made of resin with these little inserts in them, or huge inserts I should say, and they can be held any number of ways, but I have found that holding them with the hook along the inside of the finger is the most comfortable way, and also the quickest, because these are extremely fast picks, so very quick through the strings, a very urgent, present sound, of which I am a fan. The red one particularly is a favourite of mine, but I have played the black one a great deal. The white one with the red, not so much, simply because it is extremely white and I don't wish to tarnish it in a particularly visible way, and as I have a black and red, I've stuck with those for the time being. Now let's move on and we'll talk about the Northern Ghost Boo, which is here. This is made from acrylic. It is an adapted version of the gravestone with these little ridges along the bottom and the cute little eyes as well. Now I was very fortunate to receive the earliest versions of these, and I'm very, very, very fond of them. I love James's work, and he has always been a cornerstone of the shop in terms of the way he makes and the way he presents his items. This would be very comfortable for those of you who are used to the Jazz 3, and if you don't like the teeth along the bottom, there is the gravestone, which I believe is lurking in here somewhere. Let's have a look and see. To be honest, I just like moving stuff around on the table. So let's move on and talk about some more unusual pieces that I have here. Those of you with a keen eye will have noticed the Depic Argentina Virtuoso and I of Horus, which are these ones here. Now these are made using PVC from water pipes, and indeed Gabriel, who makes them, is a very keen and extremely accomplished gypsy jazz player. As a result, what you will see in the construction, apart from all the bolts and screws and the detachable ring at the top, is that when in place, the thumb tends to fall much further forward in what I believe is quite a common shape for gypsy jazz players. This is a very, very powerful plectrum, lots and lots and lots of power behind it, which is good for the style, and reminds me a little bit of a less sophisticated Wagon, which is by no means detrimental to its character, as the Depic pieces have their own tone and their own style, which is incredibly individual and something for which I have a lot of time. Gabriel also made a plectrum which is extremely unusual in that it is curved towards the inside, which is this. I believe it's called La Bombe, but you see how extreme that curve is and how it's following the line of the thumb to give you this extra purchase. Now, picks of this nature which make you hold them a certain way is something that I have felt differently about over time, but I am very keen on these, and I think his designs are extremely cool. He is right at the edge of acceptability in terms of norms within the plectroverse, and his individualistic approach to making plectrums is something that I've got a lot of time for. Staying on the unusual shape motif of the day, I think it's worth talking about this. Now, this is a Kotori lockpick, which I believe I talked about before, but I do love the design. I love the fact that it's for a singular purpose in clipping onto your tuning pegs on the stems to just click it on like that. Very, very cool. Now, Kotori also make the Silent, which is here, and this is 0.1 of a mil of extremely thin material, and it's designed so that you can play extremely softly but not having to adjust your technique, because the floppiness of the pick compensates for that and gives you real genuine delicacy, which is an extremely enjoyable thing to play with. And you wouldn't think that because it's so thin, but there's a real elegance to these. They've now brought out a model called the Super Silent, which is even more empty in its lower half, and indeed has the majority of its body at the top, with the rest of the pick being free to float. Now, the whole point of this is if you want to play softly, that can feel slightly counterintuitive, whereas using the Silent, you're able to play with the same amount of force you normally would, but the pick will generate a very, 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 very quiet sound. And indeed, it was developed for the Japanese housing market, where thin walls are very common and space is at a huge premium. So it means that guitar players are able to play at home without being intrusive towards the neighbours, which is something for which I have a great deal of time. Now, speaking of Japan, seeing as we're talking about that, this is a Pick Boy from their curved series, and this has some very extreme ergonomics to it. Now, the idea behind this is made of ebony. The idea behind this is that the lip comes over the top of the thumb to give extra stability and can also work against the finger. I do have a couple of these. This is a wood version, of which I'm very, very fond. I was sent these from overseas by my good friend Nads from Arcanum, who went on a trip to Japan and brought me back a few really interesting pieces. This is something of which I'm extremely fond, and I do have a couple of other natural material Pick Boys floating around in the collection, so we will come across those as we are going. Now, speaking of construction, let's talk about the Rost. These two here are Zufoi Rosts. As you can see, they are completely see-through, and they are made using a lattice style framework. Now, the reason for this is because the Rost was designed for playing funk, and to give that Nile Rodgers flick flick sound. They've also got incredible detailing, very small detailing on the ridges here, which will definitely not show up on camera, but it says Rost along these lines. Now, these are part of Zufoi's canon, the work of the late Malte Sadler, of whom I have spoken a great deal, and just for that extra touch, he has elected not to make them symmetrical. So instead of this being defiantly 351 shaped, it's actually slightly off to one side at the top, and this is prevalent in Malte's whole approach to pick making, and it's genuinely something I would have loved to see him pursue had he stayed with us. It's something I'll always feel very sad about, that I never got to interview him properly, even though we did have an extremely abundant discourse during the period of our knowing each other before his untimely passing. So those of you who want to know more about that, I will be doing a piece about that in due course, covering his life's work as a plectrier, and also some instances of his life, because I think that his work is essential and needs to be experienced by everyone. Now here I'm making a very small stack, initially at least, of all of my Killy Nonus picks. Now those of you who have been following the channel for a while will know that I'm very keen on those. I try and collect everything that Killy makes with these little brass inserts on them. These are made generally from Galalith, of which he is a big fan. Galalith is a dairy protein, casein, which is then combined with formaldehyde to produce an incredibly tough material. And for picks, it is one of my favourite materials, bar none. Most of the picks that I use in my day-to-day life are made of this, although I do also really enjoy everything. But if I were to really be pressed, Richlight, bone, casein, Galalith, Tagawa, and resin, which I've slowly come around to, are my principal favourites. I love Tagawa. I think it's a fantastic material, especially for acoustic use, but the Killy Nonus works in casein and Galalith are just superb, and it's a material I would not have got onto were it not for Rob over at Hawk and his incredible work in that medium. So big shout outs to both Killy and Rob for their shared efforts in that respect. So we'll just move these over here for the time being. Now, it would be remiss of me not to talk about this when we're talking about unusual shapes. This is a Bog Street leap. This is one of the original leaps before it was slightly redesigned by Paul. And there are 3 disparate tips on here. Each one has a differing thickness, and this raised centre section, which is extremely prevalent, is here to give you extra grip, and this is something that would come back in their Mini Beast model, albeit on both sides rather than just one. Now these have been refined, as I say, and now have stiffer and greater beveling on the tips, especially the harder tips, but the leap was really the very beginning of where Bog Street would go with their Axe series and so on, and I've always had time for these. I'm very proud to stock them in the shop, and for those of you who are curious, you can go and check out the shop at the link in the description and find all of the best picks available to man and woman and all points in between. So with that being said, let's move on and talk about some more unusual pieces. This is a personal favourite of mine, and I have a couple of these in different materials. This is the Arcanum Paladin, and these 2 paladins are made from Acrolester, which is this one here, which I have played a huge amount, and I'm a very big fan of. If you are trem picking or playing heavy strings and you don't have one of these, you should. It's an insistence. This one here is half resin, half Tagawa, and quite a dramatic old thing. They're both fairly hefty, around the 5mm marker, both with tons and tons of power, tons of character, and a very stately carriage, which is part of Nad's whole way of making picks. So big fan of these. They're meant to resemble a tower shield from Dungeons and Dragons, as is his whole range, really, based on that eternal tabletop playing game. Now, when we talk about ergonomics in the world of picks, it's very important to remember that there's no real one way to do this. and one of the makers who has leapt out of pick making convention with their ridiculous ergonomic shapes, and by ridiculous I mean superb, is Zen. This is a Zen Sumo, and this was more of a test that he did, but because I liked it so much, I went and bought it off Duncan, and he very kindly sent it to me. This is a huge piece, but the bevels are even larger. The amount of surface area for gripping is dwarfed by the size of the bevels, and I absolutely love this. It's one of his most outrageous pieces of work, and although quite an odd experience to play in, not something that he would pursue to any great extent, I still think it's important in the canon of plectrology just to make sure that you guys are aware that these things exist, because from the outside you think, how would I use that? But as is the case with all these things, in their actual natural application, this is a lot easier to use than one would think. Now, as we move around these elegant pieces, and just to see what else we can uncover, we find Pyro and Jacob's work, which has changed quite a bit since he first started. Originally making his pieces from aluminium and a couple of other things. This is a resin piece with aluminium strips. Now, it's very bold, as is the case with Bog Street, for your very first plectrum to be something with multiple tips, and indeed this does have multiple tips. A rhythm section, a lead section, and a section just for chords. I'm a big fan of this, and I've played this quite a lot, to the point where I started to think maybe I shouldn't use it quite as much, because I always like to preserve people's early works where possible, purely for posterity and for myself, because I like to go and revisit them and say, look at the geometry and the feeling and so forth. So that's something that's very important to me, and has always been important to me. There are certain picks that I play all the time, and some I don't play that often, simply because I want to preserve them so I can show them to other people in their best condition. And one of the fortunate things about being a modern collector is that a lot of the materials are much tougher than they were back in the 20s, 30s, 40s and so on, and as a result I do have pieces that I can use that won't deteriorate to the same extent, but there are some that are more fragile than others, and I would always like to preserve those where possible. Speaking of picks, of which I am very fond, this is a genuine top 5 for me. This is a Plex Zana. Now this comes in a couple of different varieties. I have one in Delrin as well, but this is made from cellulose acetate. It is a very distinctive, very warm, very genteel sort of sound, and I've recorded a lot with these. That's one of the few picks that I've bought backups of because I'm so keen on it. And although I like collecting everybody's models, no matter who they are or what they're making, because that's my thing, the Plex Sana has remained a firm personal favourite. I would put this up with the Zufoi Go and the Arcanum Warlock as being one of my top 5, the unyielding laminated top 5. And if you are in any way interested in this sort of shape, which is very loosely based around the old French Dura, the Harlequin Duras, then I cannot recommend Pedro's work highly enough. It is absolutely beautiful. Genuinely superb. I love that. Now, let's move on. What else do we have in this great array of items? So, let's shift them over a little bit. Now, this piece here is an Ace Performance that Anthony made purely as a test, and he said by his own admission, this doesn't really work, but I'd really like for you to have it all the same. This is made using his secret proprietary material, and it is a very weird experience to use. It's got a hint of the Giacchettos about it, though not quite as huge and extreme. But this is a very, very cool, good-looking pick, and it's loosely based off the traditional Landstrom shark fin, with those ridges on the upper side. I have played with this a little bit, but it does feel a bit strange, and it's not up to the usual standard of his tremendous force picks, of which I am extremely fond, and another pick that would comfortably enter my top 10, if not top 5, just for its sheer class and incredible durability. Now, speaking of the Arcanum Warlock, here is a recent one that I got for my upcoming tour with Under a Crumbling Moon. This is made in resin, and it's very sparkly and it's very dramatic. These are around about the 3.5 to 4 mil mark, as is my preference. I'm extremely fond of these with the Fletch Archer's Flick at the top. Their beveling and the width of the tip, which is a really key part for me. So the width of the tip is something that I find suits my personal playing style very, very well. It sweeps the strings aside very, very gracefully, but still maintains a huge amount of attack because of the tips and the density of the material. I'm very, very fond of this and very proud of the fact that we designed this together. I now have a whole load of these, 4 or 5 I think, all in varying thicknesses and all incredibly dramatic colours. So if you are looking for a pick where you're going to do lots of trim picking and rhythm work, get yourself a Warlock. That is an insistence from me. Now, looking at the time, I can see that we have passed the 20-minute mark, and I want to keep talking about these, but I think we will call it there today, as I have many other essential matters to attend to. But I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Pick ASMR. There will be another one coming down the road fairly soon, and it gives me an opportunity to revisit my collection and really get something out of it. And share it with all of you. That's the whole point of the exercise. So if you have enjoyed this, please leave a comment, and if you would like to get your hands on a lot of the picks that are featured here, you can go to heavyrepping.com and go to the guild shop, where you can find picks from Master 8, V-Picks, Mean Tone, Acoustic Attack, Arcanum, Northern Ghost, and many, many more. But with that being said, my name is John Davidson. This is Heavy Repping, and I'll see you soon. So remember, if you're not sure what to do in life, rep hard and rep heavy.